Officer Daniels was driving slowly through the quiet streets. It was late at night, and most of the town was asleep. The yellow streetlights flickered as he passed by empty sidewalks and closed stores. It was just another routine night patrol, until he saw something unusual. A small figure was running toward his police car. At first, he thought it might be a stray dog, but as he looked closer, he realized it was a little girl. She was barefoot, wearing a thin nightgown that barely covered her small frame. Her arms clutched something tightly against her chest. Her messy hair stuck to her wet cheeks, and her tiny feet slapped against the pavement as she ran. She was crying. Daniels quickly stopped the car and stepped out. The girl ran straight to him, shaking and gasping for breath. Her eyes were filled with fear. He knelt to her level, trying to calm her down. Hey, it's okay. What's wrong?" he asked gently. The girl struggled to speak between sobs. Then, in a tiny, trembling voice, she whispered 3 words. "Help my mommy." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen frightened children before, but there was something about the way she said it that sent a strange feeling through his body. She looked up at him, eyes wide with desperation, and that's when he noticed what she was holding. A small old teddy bear. At first, it seemed like a regular stuffed toy, something any child might carry. But then he saw it clearly in the glow of the streetlight. The bear had one eye stitched up with black thread, its fur worn and faded from age. A memory flashed in his mind. A case from years ago. It had been one of the few cases that haunted him. A missing child. A broken family. A single clue left behind. A teddy bear exactly like this one, found near an abandoned house. The child was never found. The case had gone cold, leaving only unanswered questions. Daniel swallowed hard. His hands felt cold despite the warm night air. He looked back at the girl, who was still crying, holding the bear tightly. "Where's your mommy?" he asked softly. She turned and pointed toward the dark alley behind her. Daniels followed her gaze, his heart pounding. The alley was narrow and silent, disappearing into the shadows between 2 buildings. No streetlights reached that far. Daniels reached for his radio, calling for backup. "This is Officer Daniels. I have a lost child requesting help for her mother. Investigating now." His voice remained calm, but his mind was racing. He glanced down at the girl again. She clutched his sleeve, her tiny fingers shaking. Her eyes pleaded with him. "Please," she whispered. Daniels gave her a reassuring nod. "I promise. I'll help." But as he stepped toward the alley, his instincts told him that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he had imagined. Daniels took a deep breath and held the little girl's hand tightly. She was still shaking, her small fingers gripping his like she was afraid to let go. He knelt down and spoke softly. "I need you to stay right here, okay? I'll check on your mommy." The girl shook her head quickly, tears filling her eyes again. "No, don't leave me," she begged. Daniels hesitated. He knew something was very wrong. The fear in her voice wasn't just from being lost. She had seen something that terrified her. He couldn't leave her alone. "All right," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "You stay with me. Just hold on tight, and I won't let go." She nodded, still clutching the teddy bear in her other hand. Daniels led her slowly toward the alley. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing cracked pavement and broken bottles. A rusted dumpster sat against the wall, and the air smelled damp and musty. The further they walked, the quieter it got. Then he saw it, the open door of a small rundown house at the end of the alley. It was barely hanging on its hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. A weak light flickered inside. Daniels felt the little girl grip his hand even tighter. "That's our house," she whispered. His heart pounded harder. He stepped closer and listened. At first, he heard nothing but the distant hum of the city. Then, there it was, a faint, muffled sound. A voice. Someone was inside. Daniels took a careful step forward, pushing the door open with his free hand. The old wood creaked loudly. The inside of the house was dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner. The walls were peeling, and the furniture looked old and broken. He scanned the room quickly. No movement. Then he heard it again, a weak, almost inaudible cry. It was coming from another room. Daniels turned to the girl. "Stay close to me," he whispered. She nodded, her face pale. Moving carefully, he followed the sound into a small bedroom. The sight before him made his breath catch. A woman was lying on the floor, her hands tied behind her back. Her face was bruised, her lips dry and cracked. She barely had the strength to lift her head. The girl let out a small cry. "Mommy." The woman's eyes flickered open, and for a brief moment, relief washed over her face. "Baby, you're safe," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Daniels didn't waste a second. He knelt beside her, quickly untying the rough ropes that bound her wrists. "You're going to be okay," he assured her. "Help is on the way." But as he looked at her, something in her expression changed. Fear returned to her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. "He's coming back," she whispered. Daniels froze. His grip tightened around his radio. The air in the house suddenly felt colder. Someone else had been here, and they might be coming back any second. Daniels felt his pulse quicken as he processed the woman's words. "He's coming back." He glanced at the open door behind him, his senses on high alert. The little girl clung tightly to his arm, her tiny body trembling. The woman, still weak, tried to sit up, her eyes darting toward the doorway, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Daniels quickly grabbed his radio and pressed the button. Officer Daniels requesting immediate backup. Possible intruder returning to the scene. Location: abandoned house, North Alley. His voice was steady, but inside, he was tense. He knew he had to get the woman and the girl out before whoever had done this returned. He turned to the woman. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. She nodded weakly, though it was clear she was in pain. Daniels helped her to her feet, keeping his other hand on his holstered gun. Every sound outside, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of cars, made his nerves tighten. The woman clutched his arm for support. "We have to go now," she whispered. Daniels nodded. "Stay behind me. Hold on to your daughter." The woman reached for the little girl, pulling her close. The girl wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, burying her face into her torn dress. Step by step, they moved toward the door. Daniels kept his eyes on every shadow, every dark corner, his grip tightening on his weapon. The house felt heavier now, like the walls were pressing in on them. Then, footsteps. A slow, deliberate sound echoed from outside the house, heavy boots crunching against gravel. Someone was coming. Daniels stopped, his body going rigid. The woman's breathing grew shallow, and the girl whimpered softly. "Stay behind me," Daniels whispered again. The footsteps came closer. Then a shadow passed the doorway, blocking the dim streetlight. Daniels acted fast. He stepped forward, his gun raised. "Police, show me your hands," he commanded. Silence. The shadow didn't move. Daniels tightened his grip. "I said, show me your hands." Then, just as suddenly as the footsteps had come, the shadow stepped back. The sound of retreating footsteps echoed into the alley. Daniels quickly moved toward the doorway, but by the time he looked outside, the alley was empty. The wind rustled a few pieces of trash along the pavement, but whoever had been there was gone. He didn't waste time searching. His priority was the woman and her daughter. He turned back, motioning for them to follow. "Let's go. Now." The woman, still leaning on him for support, stumbled forward, holding her daughter close. Daniels led them out of the house, his eyes still scanning the area, his heart pounding. As they stepped into the street, the sound of approaching sirens finally filled the night. Backup had arrived. Daniels exhaled, but he knew this wasn't over. Whoever had hurt this woman, whoever had taken her, he was still out there. and Daniels wasn't going to stop until he found him. The flashing red and blue lights filled the dark street as police cars pulled up. Officers rushed out, surrounding the area. Paramedics followed close behind, carrying their medical bags. The little girl held onto her mother tightly, afraid to let go. The woman was weak, her body trembling, but she refused to loosen her grip on her daughter. Daniels turned to one of the paramedics. "She's injured. She needs help." The paramedics carefully helped the woman onto a stretcher. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking, but she kept her eyes on her daughter. "Please, don't let them take her away from me," she whispered. Daniels knelt beside her. "You're safe now. No one's going to take her from you." The little girl climbed onto the stretcher, holding her mother's hand as the paramedics started checking her injuries. Daniels stood up and turned to his fellow officers. "The suspect was here," he said. "He ran into the alley before backup arrived. We need to search the area." 2 officers nodded and moved toward the alley, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Another officer, Captain Morris, walked up to Daniels. "Who is she?" he asked. Daniels looked back at the woman and the girl. He had a strong feeling he had seen them before, but he couldn't place it. Then suddenly, it hit him. His eyes went to the teddy bear the little girl was still holding. That bear, it wasn't just familiar. It was identical to the one from a case years ago. A missing child case, a case that had never been solved. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He turned back to the woman. "Ma'am," he said gently, "what's your name?" The woman hesitated. She licked her dry lips before answering. Lena Carter." The name hit Daniels like a shockwave. His mind raced back to his old case files. Lena Carter had disappeared almost 6 years ago. No one knew what had happened to her. There were no leads, no suspects. She had simply vanished. And the little girl. Daniels looked at her again, his chest tightening. If Lena had been missing for 6 years, then this girl had to be. He took a step closer. "Lena," he said carefully, "your daughter. What's her name?" Lena swallowed hard. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Emily." Daniels felt his breath catch. He remembered that name. Emily Carter. She had been listed as missing at just a few months old, the baby who had disappeared along with her mother. And now, standing right in front of him, was that same little girl, no longer a baby but a child, clutching the same teddy bear from the case that had haunted him for years. Lena gripped his arm, her voice shaking. "He took us," she said. "He took us, and he never let us go." Daniels clenched his jaw. His hands curled into fists. The man who had done this, the man who had stolen a mother and child away from their lives, was still out there. And Daniels was going to find him. Daniels stood frozen for a moment, trying to process everything. The case that had haunted him for years, the missing mother and baby, was now right in front of him. The little girl, Emily, clung to her mother, unaware of the weight of the truth that had just come to light. Lena was still weak, but she held onto Daniel's arm with surprising strength. Her eyes, filled with exhaustion and pain, locked onto his. "He's still out there," she whispered. "He's not going to stop looking for us." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. Whoever had taken them had kept them hidden for 6 long years. This wasn't just some random crime. It was something much darker. He turned to Captain Morris. "We need to get them to a safe place immediately, and we need every available unit searching for him." Morris nodded, already giving orders to the officers around them. More patrol cars spread out, searching the streets and alleys. They couldn't let this man escape. Meanwhile, the paramedics helped Lena into the ambulance, but she refused to let go of Emily's hand. "Mommy's right here," she whispered to her daughter, who still looked frightened. Daniels walked beside them. "Lena," he said gently, "do you remember anything that can help us find him?" Lena took a shaky breath. "He moved us a lot," she said. "We were never in one place for too long. But lately, he kept talking about a new place. Somewhere far." Daniels frowned. "Did he say where?" She shook her head. No, but he was packing things. He was preparing to leave. She looked at Daniels with fear in her eyes. If he gets away, he'll take someone else. Daniels' jaw tightened. He wasn't going to let that happen. Just then, an officer ran up to them, slightly out of breath. "We checked the alley," he said. "No sign of him. But we found something in the house." Daniels followed the officer back inside. In one of the small rooms, they found a pile of documents, torn papers, and a half-packed bag. Scattered among them were several fake IDs, different names, different photos. It was clear that the man they were hunting wasn't just any criminal. He was experienced, careful. But one thing stood out among the mess. Daniels picked up a ticket stub from a bus station. The date was fresh, tomorrow. "He's planning to leave the city," Daniels muttered. He turned to the officer. "Get units to the bus station. If he's running, we need to be there first." The officer nodded and rushed off. Daniels exhaled and glanced back at the teddy bear lying on the table. It had been a silent witness to everything, a reminder of the years lost. But this time, Daniels wasn't going to let the past slip away. He was going to end this. Daniels wasted no time. He grabbed his radio and called for units to surround the bus station. If the suspect was planning to leave the city, they had to stop him before he disappeared again. He walked back to the ambulance, where Lena and Emily sat inside. Lena looked at him, fear still in her eyes. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Daniels nodded. "We found a bus ticket. He might be leaving tomorrow." Lena swallowed hard. He never liked staying in one place too long. "If he gets away now, you might never find him." Daniels knew she was right. The man they were dealing with had stayed hidden for 6 years. He had planned every move carefully. If he escaped, he would change his name, his location, everything. And they might never track him down again. Emily, still holding her teddy bear, looked up at Daniels with wide eyes. "Will the bad man come back?" she asked softly. Daniels knelt beside her. "Not if I can help it," he said firmly. He turned back to Morris, who was already giving orders to the officers. "We need plainclothes officers at the bus station," Morris said. "He might recognize a uniform." Daniels agreed. "I'll go in myself." Morris hesitated. "Are you sure? This guy is dangerous." Daniels nodded. "I need to see his face. I need to be the one to stop him." With that, he grabbed a jacket from his patrol car to cover his uniform. He looked back at Lena. "Stay with the paramedics. You and Emily are safe here." Lena's hand tightened around her daughter's. "Please, don't let him get away." Daniels gave her a reassuring nod before heading to his car. The night was still dark, but he felt the weight of the coming hours pressing down on him. As he drove toward the bus station, he kept thinking about the man they were hunting. Who was he really? Why had he taken Lena and Emily? What was he running from now? By the time he reached the station, officers were already positioned around the area. Some were dressed as travelers, blending in with the crowd. Daniels parked his car a few blocks away and walked toward the entrance. His eyes scanned every person, searching for a familiar face. Then, near the ticket counter, he saw him. A man in a dark hoodie, standing alone, checking his phone. His posture was stiff, like he was nervous. A large duffel bag rested beside him. Daniels felt his heartbeat quicken. It's him. He took a deep breath and walked closer, pretending to be just another passenger. His hand rested near his concealed weapon. The station was busy, filled with people moving in every direction. If the man realized he was being watched, he might try to run. Daniels couldn't let that happen. This was it. The moment to finally end the nightmare that had started 6 years ago. Daniels moved carefully through the crowd, his eyes locked on the man in the hoodie. Every instinct told him this was the person he had been searching for, the man who had stolen 6 years of Lena and Emily's life. The suspect checked his phone again, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He seemed anxious, his gaze darting around the station. He knows he's running out of time, Daniels thought. Through his earpiece, he heard Captain Morris's voice. "We have officers at every exit. Give the signal when you're ready." Daniels kept his tone steady. "Wait for my move. If he senses trouble, he'll bolt." The man picked up his duffel bag and started walking toward the boarding area. Daniels followed, keeping a safe distance. His grip tightened near his hidden weapon. The moment had to be perfect. One wrong move, and the suspect could disappear into the crowd. Then, the man slowed down. He turned slightly, scanning the people around him. For a second, Daniels thought he had been spotted, but then the suspect's gaze landed on a woman walking past, a young mother holding the hand of a little boy. Daniels felt his stomach tighten. The man watched them for too long, his fingers twitching at his side. He's looking for his next victim. Daniels didn't wait any longer. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "Hey, buddy, you waiting for someone?" The man froze. Slowly, he turned to face Daniels. His hood covered part of his face, but Daniels could see his jaw tighten, his eyes shifting quickly to the exits. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice sharp. Daniels gave a small smile, keeping his posture relaxed. "Just another traveler. You seem nervous. Something wrong?" The man's fingers curled around the strap of his bag. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, taking a small step backward. Daniels took a step forward. "You sure? Because I think you do." For a split second, everything was still. Then, without warning, the man turned and ran. Daniels didn't hesitate. "Go! Go! He's running!" he shouted into his earpiece as he chased after him. Officers rushed in from all directions, blocking exits. The man dodged through the crowd, shoving people aside. He jumped over a bench, knocking down a suitcase, but Daniels was fast. He pushed forward, closing the distance. The suspect reached the emergency exit door, slamming his hand against the bar to push it open. But before he could escape, Daniels lunged. He tackled the man to the ground, pinning his arms down. The suspect struggled wildly, kicking and twisting, but Daniels held firm. "Let me go," the man shouted. Daniels pressed his knee down, pulling out his handcuffs. "Not a chance," he growled. Within seconds, officers surrounded them, securing the area. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. Daniels tightened the handcuffs around the suspect's wrists as officers moved in to assist. The man struggled, his face twisting in anger, but there was nowhere left to run. "You're done," Daniels said firmly. "It's over." The suspect glared at him. "You have no proof." Daniels smirked. "We have more than you think." The officers pulled the man to his feet. As they did, something fell from his pocket. A small key. Daniels picked it up, his mind racing. A key meant there was still a place this man had used. Maybe a hideout. Maybe a storage unit with more evidence. Captain Morris stepped up. "We'll find out everything soon enough. Get him out of here." Two officers led the suspect away as the crowd slowly returned to normal. People whispered, watching as the man was taken into custody. Daniels let out a deep breath. It was over. Or so he thought. His phone rang. It was the officer watching over Lena and Emily. Daniels quickly answered. "Are they okay?" "They're fine," the officer assured him. "But Lena just remembered something important. She says there's a place he used to take them. A cabin, somewhere outside the city." Daniels felt his pulse quicken. "Get the address. We're checking it now." 30 minutes later, Daniels and a small team of officers arrived at an old cabin deep in the woods. The place looked abandoned, but as they stepped inside, the truth became clear. There were signs of someone living there recently. Food on the table, clothes folded neatly in a corner, and on the wall, a row of photographs. Daniel's stomach turned. The photos were of Lena and Emily, some from years ago, others more recent. It was clear the suspect had been documenting everything, watching them, controlling them. But then, Daniel saw something even more disturbing. A list of names. Other names. His chest tightened. "Morris," he called, "this isn't just about Lena and Emily." He was planning to take someone else. Morris scanned the names. "We need to track these people down. Make sure they're safe." Daniels nodded. The case wasn't over yet. There were more lives at stake. Back at the station, Lena and Emily waited. When Daniels walked in, Emily ran up to him, holding her teddy bear. "Did you catch him?" she asked. Daniels knelt beside her, smiling gently. "Yeah, kiddo. He's never going to hurt you again." Tears filled Lena's eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Daniels stood, watching as mother and daughter embraced. The years they had lost could never be returned, but at least now they had a chance to start over. And as Daniels walked out of the room, he knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for people like them. Because sometimes just one moment of bravery could bring justice to those who needed it most.